The morning began with a strange silence across the snowy mountains. The film crew believed they were prepared for the cold. They had layers of clothing ready, warm tents, backup equipment, and a schedule that looked strong enough to survive any unexpected weather changes. But the mountains had their own plans, and the quiet white landscape around them held a secret they had not imagined. As the first soft rays of the sun stretched across the frozen ground, the crew members stepped out from their vehicles and felt a small warning in the air. It was colder than the forecast had said. Much colder. The kind of cold that creeps into the bones before anyone has time to react. Keanu Reeves walked out first, calm as always, but even he paused for a moment when the sharp wind touched his face. It carried a chill he had not felt in years, a cold so deep that it felt almost alive. He looked around at the crew setting up cameras and adjusting lights. Everyone looked excited yet slightly uncomfortable. He tightened his jacket, but his eyes remained steady as he watched the landscape. It was beautiful in a harsh way. The air sparkled like tiny diamonds floating in the wind. The mountains stood tall and silent, almost like guardians watching over the people who had stepped into their territory. The scene they planned to shoot today required snow, stillness, and emotion. They had all those things in front of them, but none of them realized that nature had given them more than they expected. Sandra Bullock arrived a few minutes later. She stepped out of the van with a soft smile, ready to start the day. She rubbed her hands together and looked up at the sky. The clouds were heavy and pale, and the wind kept shifting as if trying to communicate a warning. She felt a tiny shiver inside her chest, not from fear but from the intensity of the cold. She had filmed in winter before, but something about this place felt different. It was beautiful but unforgiving. She walked toward the crew, who greeted her warmly. She greeted them back, but her voice trembled slightly with the chill. The director quickly gathered everyone for the morning briefing. He explained the plan for the day, the scenes they needed to shoot, and the adjustments they might have to make if the weather turned worse. Although he spoke confidently, he kept glancing at the mountains with concern. The wind grew sharper every few seconds, and the snowflakes floating in the air seemed to multiply. It was still manageable, but only just. Sandra stood beside Keanu as the director spoke. Keanu turned slightly toward her and asked quietly if she was all right. She smiled and said she was fine, but he noticed how she held her arms close to her body, trying to keep the warmth inside. He noticed everything. He always did. When the briefing ended, the crew moved quickly to prepare the set. They had a limited window before the weather made filming impossible. Sandra walked to her mark and took a deep breath. The cold wrapped around her like an invisible blanket. It pressed against her shoulders, crawled up her spine, and squeezed the air from her lungs. She tried to hide the discomfort. She had always been professional and strong. She had pushed through difficult conditions before. But this cold felt more intense than anything she had experienced. She could feel it drifting under her clothing and biting through every layer. She pulled her scarf tighter around her neck, but it did little to help. Keanu stood a short distance away, watching her with quiet focus. He noticed the way she shifted her weight from foot to foot. He noticed the slight shaking in her hands when she tried to adjust her hair for the camera. He noticed the way her breath came out in short, uneven clouds. He walked closer, his footsteps leaving deep marks in the snow. He asked her again if she was all right. She nodded quickly and said she just needed a moment to adjust to the cold. He nodded back, but his eyes showed concern. He could tell that she was pushing herself too hard against the weather. The director called for a rehearsal. The cameras rolled slowly and Sandra began her lines. As she spoke, the wind grew stronger. It hit her side and forced her to blink rapidly as the cold rushed against her eyes. She kept acting, trying to keep her voice stable, trying to stay focused on the moment. But the shaking in her hands grew worse. She wrapped her arms tighter around herself between lines, but the cold had already taken hold of her. Her breath grew shorter and shallower. She felt her body losing heat faster than she could recover it. Keanu watched her closely. Something inside him tightened when he saw her shivering more intensely. He stepped forward and signaled the director to pause. The director looked confused for a moment, but then he saw the situation on Sandra's face. Her cheeks had turned pale, her lips were losing color, her shoulders trembled in a way she could no longer hide. The crew fell silent. The cameras stopped. The wind continued its icy push as if trying to bury the entire set under its freezing breath. Sandra looked down, embarrassed that she had slowed the shoot. She felt the pressure of everyone's eyes on her even if no one said anything. She whispered that she could continue. Her voice was soft and thin like the last spark of warmth she had left inside her. But before she could take another step, Keanu walked toward her with calm determination. He removed his thick thermal coat without hesitation and placed it gently around her shoulders. The warmth of the coat surrounded her instantly. Her eyes widened in surprise as she felt the heat settling against her freezing skin. Keanu held the coat firmly around her, making sure it covered her completely. His hands remained steady as he spoke quietly so only she could hear him. He told her that she did not need to pretend she was fine. He told her that no scene was more important than her well-being. His voice was soft but filled with sincerity. She looked up at him with gratitude and vulnerability. She felt the warmth not only from the coat but from the pure kindness he had shown her. The crew watched the moment with silent respect. No one spoke. No one interrupted. The scene in front of them felt more powerful than anything they had planned to shoot. For the first time that morning, the cold around Sandra softened. She felt her breath return slowly as the warmth from the coat spread across her body. She whispered a quiet thank you. Her voice carried both relief and emotion. Keanu nodded and told her to take her time. The mountains stood silent as if acknowledging the moment between them. The wind eased for a brief second, and a soft blanket of snow drifted gently down around them. The moment felt timeless, almost sacred, as if nature itself had paused to witness the kindness shared between two people. And while the crew began to readjust the schedule and set up heaters, Sandra stood quietly, wrapped in the warmth Keanu had given, realizing that this small act of care was going to become one of the most unforgettable memories of her life. The crew gathered near the equipment truck, trying to warm their hands with small portable heaters while discussing how to adjust the schedule. The unexpected cold had changed everything. The director walked back and forth, his breath forming small white clouds as he tried to think of solutions. The cameras were freezing fast, and the lights kept flickering from the icy wind. Even the sound equipment was reacting to the cold, producing a faint crackling noise that worried the sound engineer. Each minute that passed made the situation more complicated. Yet there was something else that held everyone's attention. Their eyes kept drifting toward Keanu and Sandra, who stood a short distance away, quietly sharing a moment that felt gentle in the middle of the storm. Sandra was wrapped tightly in the thick thermal coat Keanu had given her. The warmth felt like a shield between her and the harsh weather. Her body slowly stopped trembling, but the emotional weight of what had happened remained inside her. She looked down at her hands, which were still slightly stiff from the cold. She rubbed them together slowly, trying to bring them fully back to life. Keanu stood beside her, watching carefully without making her feel pressured. His calm presence felt like another layer of warmth, something gentle and protective that she had not expected to feel so strongly. After a few minutes of silence, Sandra finally looked up at him. She gave him a small, grateful smile, the kind that holds more emotion than words could express. She tried to speak, but her voice still carried the softness of someone recovering from shock. She told him that she was embarrassed for slowing the entire shoot. She said she should have been prepared, she should have handled the cold better. But Keanu shook his head immediately. He spoke in a low, steady tone, telling her that no one could have predicted how severe the weather would become. He told her that she had nothing to feel embarrassed about. He said filming was important, but her safety mattered far more. His words settled into her heart with unexpected strength. She felt a warmth inside that was separate from the coat. It was the feeling of being truly seen and understood. It reminded her why working with him always felt different. He noticed the small things. He cared in ways that never demanded attention or praise. She took a deep breath, letting the warmth calm her nerves. The director approached them carefully with a new plan. He said they needed at least one good take from the scene before the weather became impossible. But he also said they could modify the setup to reduce the time Sandra would need to stay in the open cold. He looked at Keanu and Sandra with concern, asking if they felt ready. Sandra hesitated. She wanted to continue. She wanted to prove she could handle it. But she also knew the cold had pushed her closer to her limit than she wanted to admit. Before she could respond, Keanu spoke gently. He said they would try only if Sandra was warm, comfortable, and completely ready. The director nodded quickly, agreeing that nothing mattered more than their physical condition. Sandra felt a strange mix of pressure and relief. She wanted to keep going, but she also felt the cold lingering underneath her skin like a reminder of what had happened. As the crew prepared the set again, the wind began to shift. It grew calmer for a moment, almost like a pause between breaths. The sun tried to push through the thick clouds, creating a soft glow across the snow. The moment felt rare, like a small gift from nature itself. Sandra took a few steps toward the set with Keanu walking beside her. The coat still wrapped around her shoulders, heavy and warm, grounding her with each movement. Keanu stayed close, watching the ground, the sky, and every small sign that the weather might turn again. When they reached the mark, Sandra handed the coat back to him even though she still felt safer with it on. She smiled and said she needed to show the camera that she was fine. Keanu reluctantly accepted the coat, but he kept his eyes on her with protective focus. The scene they were about to film required emotional intensity. It required Sandra to stand in the snow while delivering lines that carried sadness and vulnerability. Ironically, the real cold she had just experienced made the emotional tone of the scene feel even deeper. The director lifted his hand and called for the cameras to roll. Sandra took a slow breath. The wind brushed her hair gently as she began her lines. Her voice held a softness that surprised even her. It carried honesty and emotion, the kind of emotion that no acting technique could fully create. The cold around her made her eyes glisten and her breath visible. It looked powerful on camera. It looked real. Keanu watched her from the side, ready to step in if the cold became too much again. He stood with his coat folded over his arm, ready to wrap it around her in a second if she needed it. As she continued the scene, a surprising moment happened. The wind fell completely silent for a brief few seconds. It was as if the mountains were watching her, allowing her this single moment of peace. The snowflakes stopped swirling and instead drifted slowly downward like soft floating feathers. The air turned still and clear. The camera crew glanced at each other in astonishment. They had never seen the weather freeze in such a perfect way. The entire world felt paused. Sandra continued her emotional monologue, and her voice echoed softly in the silence. Every word carried weight. Every breath looked like a soft puff of fog rising in the cold air. The scene became more powerful than anyone expected. The director watched with wide eyes. He whispered slowly to the assistant beside him that this moment felt like magic. He said that sometimes real nature created scenes that no artificial setup could match. The assistant nodded, mesmerized by the beauty unfolding in front of them. As Sandra reached the final line of the scene, the wind suddenly returned. Not violently, but enough to let everyone feel that the moment had ended. The director quickly called cut. The crew let out a breath they had been unconsciously holding. Sandra exhaled too, relieved and tired. Keanu walked to her immediately and placed the coat back over her shoulders. She smiled in gratitude. The warmth returned instantly, and she leaned into it slightly, her body recognizing the comfort more than her mind could. The director hurried toward them with excitement. He told Sandra that her performance had been incredible. He said it might be one of the strongest scenes she had ever delivered. Sandra looked surprised. She did not feel strong. She felt cold, fragile, and a little shaken. But the director insisted that her vulnerability had made the scene powerful. He thanked her sincerely and then thanked Keanu for watching over her so closely. As the crew reviewed the footage, Sandra stood quietly beside Keanu in the snow. She told him softly that she did not think she could have done the scene without his support. Keanu shook his head and said she did it all on her own. He said he only made sure she stayed safe, but Sandra knew that was not the whole truth. His presence had given her the courage to push through fear. His kindness had given her the warmth she needed to stand in that frozen world. The sky began to darken as clouds gathered again. The wind picked up with more force. The director decided they should take a break and relocate some equipment to a safer spot. The crew began packing quickly. Keanu helped Sandra step carefully across the slippery snow toward the warming tent. She held the coat close to her body, feeling a strange mixture of exhaustion and comfort. Inside her mind, questions began to rise. Why had the cold affected her so deeply this time? Why did Keanu's kindness feel like something more meaningful than just a simple gesture? And why did the mountains remain so silent, as if waiting for something else to happen? Before she entered the tent, she turned back and looked at the set. The snow continued to fall softly. The mountains stood tall and mysterious. Something about the place felt unfinished. She had a strange sense that the cold was not done revealing its truth. Something was coming, something hidden beneath the icy air around them. She did not know what it was, but deep inside her heart she felt a quiet pull, a sense that this day was only the beginning of a much deeper story. And as she stepped into the warmth of the tent with Keanu close behind her, the mountains continued to watch in silence, holding secrets that neither of them could yet understand. The warming tent felt like a different world compared to the frozen set outside. A soft orange glow filled the space from small portable heaters placed around the corners. Heavy blankets lay stacked in neat piles, and a long table was lined with thermos flasks full of warm drinks. The sudden warmth wrapped around Sandra as soon as she stepped inside. Her fingers tingled painfully as the blood returned to them and her breathing slowly steadied. She pulled the coat tighter around her shoulders and let out a long breath that she did not realize she had been holding. Keanu followed her into the tent, but he remained near the entrance for a moment, brushing off the snow from his hair and jacket. He kept glancing outside, checking the shifting wind and the clouds gathering above the mountains. Something about the weather made him uneasy. It felt unpredictable, almost alive. After a moment, he walked toward Sandra and sat beside her on a folding chair. He noticed the slight redness around her fingers and quietly reached for a warm pack from the table. He handed it to her without saying anything. She accepted it with a soft, grateful smile and held it between her palms. The crew members entered the tent one by one, shaking off the cold and gathering near the heaters. Some of them whispered about the strange stillness that had fallen during Sandra's emotional scene. Others talked about how the wind suddenly returned afterward. A few joked nervously that the mountain seemed to be listening to the filming. No one said it seriously, yet there was something in their voices that hinted at a quiet unease. Even the most experienced crew felt something unusual in the air. Sandra leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes for a few seconds. She could still feel the cold deep inside her chest, like a memory her body refused to let go of. The warmth around her felt comforting, but the mountain's presence lingered in her mind. When she opened her eyes again, she found Keanu watching her with quiet concern. He asked if she felt any better. She nodded softly and said her body was warming up, but her thoughts still felt tangled. She admitted something to him that she had not expected to say. She told him the cold outside had scared her in a way she could not explain. She said it felt stronger than anything she had faced before, as if the mountain itself was testing her. Keanu listened quietly without interrupting. After a moment, he nodded and said he felt something strange about the weather, too. He said he had been in many cold locations for filming, but this one felt different, sharper, heavier, almost intentional. Sandra looked at him, surprised that he felt it too. Before they could talk further, the tent door opened and the director walked in, wiping his glasses and shaking snow from his hat. He gathered everyone around the center of the tent. His voice was serious but calm as he explained the situation. The storm coming in from the west was stronger than expected. They would have to move equipment to a safer area and prepare for sudden drops in temperature. He said they might not be able to shoot much more today unless the weather improved later in the afternoon. As he spoke, the wind outside grew louder. The tent shook slightly. A collective unease spread across the crew. Sandra wrapped the coat even tighter around herself. Keanu placed a gentle hand on her arm, almost unconsciously, as if offering reassurance without thinking. She felt the warmth of his touch even through the fabric. It steadied her breathing. After the meeting, the crew began carrying lights and camera equipment to a sheltered area behind large rocks. Sandra watched them through the clear tent flap. The snow was falling harder now, and the wind had picked up again. It created small spirals across the ground, making the landscape look alive and restless. She felt a quiet chill run down her spine even though she stood inside the warm tent. Something about the mountain felt like it was waiting for something. Keanu asked if she wanted to step outside with him for a moment. He said he wanted to check the path toward the next location and thought she might want some fresh air after sitting in the tent for too long. Sandra hesitated, but part of her felt drawn to the cold again, as if understanding it would help her feel stronger. She agreed and followed him outside. The moment she stepped out, the cold rushed toward her like a wall. It was sharp and unforgiving, but she felt more prepared this time. She stayed close to Keanu as they walked across the snow. The sky was darker now. Heavy gray clouds stretched across the mountains, swallowing the sunlight. The wind carried a low, whispering sound that echoed through the valleys. Sandra paused and turned her head slightly, listening. It almost sounded like voices, faint and distant, carried through the air. She blinked and shook her head, thinking it was just the wind playing tricks on her mind. Keanu looked at her and asked if she was all right. She forced a small smile and nodded. They continued walking toward a rocky area where the crew planned to move the next part of the scene. As they approached the edge of the rocks, Sandra slipped slightly on the snow. Her foot lost its grip and she felt her body tilt forward. Before she could fall, Keanu grabbed her arm firmly and pulled her back to balance. She let out a shaky breath and thanked him quietly. He asked her again in a gentle tone if she truly felt ready to continue filming later. Sandra looked toward the mountains. The snow kept falling in slow, heavy layers. The cold pressed against her face. But inside her chest, something shifted, something quiet but strong. She told Keanu she wanted to continue. She said she did not want fear to control her. Keanu nodded, respecting her determination. He admired her strength more than she realized. As they walked back toward the tent, the wind suddenly died again for a brief moment. The silence returned just like before. The snowflakes floated instead of falling. Sandra and Keanu both stopped walking at the exact same second. Neither of them had planned it. They simply felt the stillness at the same time. Keanu lifted his head and looked toward the peak of the mountain. Sandra followed his gaze. The peak was barely visible through the gray clouds, but something about it felt powerful. For a moment, Sandra felt as if the mountain was watching them, not in a frightening way, but in a way that felt ancient and deep. She could not explain it, but she felt it strongly. Keanu seemed to feel something similar because his expression grew thoughtful. They stood in silence for several seconds until the wind returned and the spell broke. Back in the tent, Sandra sat down again, but her mind kept replaying the stillness they had just experienced. She touched her arms lightly as if trying to understand why the air around her felt so heavy with meaning. Keanu sat beside her again, quietly thoughtful. The crew continued working around them, but their world felt separate, wrapped in a bubble of quiet tension and awareness. Sandra looked at Keanu and asked him what he thought the mountain wanted. She said it half jokingly, half sincerely. Keanu did not laugh. He looked at her with calm eyes and said something that surprised her. He said sometimes nature gives warnings before it gives lessons. He said he did not know what the mountain wanted, but he believed there was something they were supposed to understand here. His words sent a soft chill through her chest, not from fear but from curiosity. A sense of mystery began to settle into her thoughts. She wondered what the mountain would reveal next. She wondered why the weather seemed to shift in perfect timing with their moments. She wondered why the stillness happened twice when she stood beside Keanu, and she wondered what that meant. As the sky grew darker and the storm approached, Sandra realized that the cold outside was not the only force they had to face. Something deeper was happening here, something that involved the weather, the mountain, and the quiet bond forming between her and Keanu. She did not know where this day was leading them, but she knew one thing for certain. The story of this mountain was far from over. The afternoon arrived slower than anyone expected. The sky had darkened into a heavy gray sheet, thick enough to swallow the sunlight and make the world appear muted. The storm that the director warned about was moving quickly across the mountains. Each gust of wind came sharper than the one before, sweeping over the ground and blowing fine layers of snow into the air like soft white dust. The temperature dropped again, wrapping everything in an icy grip that made even the heaters inside the tent work harder. Yet despite the growing intensity outside, the tent felt strangely calm. Sandra sat on a folding chair with her hands wrapped around a warm drink, the coat Keanu gave her still draped over her shoulders like a shield. She stared at the floor quietly, lost in thought. Keanu sat near the entrance of the tent, watching the weather shift every few minutes. He could feel the storm becoming stronger. He felt an instinctive uneasiness, but he stayed focused. He had always trusted his intuition, and right now it was telling him to stay alert. He glanced back at Sandra and saw the distant expression on her face. Something inside him softened. He got up and walked toward her slowly, taking a chair and placing it beside her before sitting down. She looked at him and tried to smile, but it carried a shadow of worry. He asked her what she was thinking about. She took a slow breath and said she was trying to understand why the cold earlier felt like more than just weather. She said it felt personal, almost like the mountain was testing her, pushing her towards something she had not yet understood. Keanu listened carefully and nodded. He told her again that he felt the same something strange and heavy in the air. He said that some places carried energy that people could feel even if they could not explain it. Sandra nodded slowly, unsure if she felt comforted or concerned by the thought. The crew outside shouted instructions as they moved the remaining equipment to a safe spot. The storm was moving fast, and they needed to secure everything before the wind became dangerous. The sound of metal clanging and crates closing echoed through the cold air. Sandra stood up and walked toward the small plastic window of the tent. She watched the silhouettes of the crew moving through the swirling snow. Their movements looked slow and heavy, as if the cold was pulling against their bodies with each step. She turned back to Keanu. Her voice was soft when she spoke. She admitted that she felt something inside her shifting since the moment he wrapped the coat around her. She said it felt like the cold had tried to take something from her earlier and he had stepped in before that could happen. She said she felt safe when he was near her. The moment those words left her mouth, she felt vulnerable. Her eyes lowered and she looked at the ground for a second, unsure if she had said too much. Keanu did not answer immediately. He watched her gently, not with surprise but with understanding. He told her that he did not plan anything when he walked toward her earlier. He told her it was instinct. He said he saw her suffering and he could not let her face it alone. His voice was simple and honest, carrying no hesitation. Sandra looked up into his eyes. The warmth she saw there felt stronger than the heat of the tent. She felt her heart loosening in a way she had not expected. She took a small step toward him, and he noticed it. He felt the shift between them too. The storm outside howled louder, yet inside the tent, The world felt strangely quiet. Suddenly, the director pushed open the tent flap, pulling in a burst of cold air. He announced that the storm was crossing the final ridge faster than predicted. They had 30 minutes before the wind reached dangerous levels. He wanted to film one more short scene before the weather forced them to end the day entirely. Sandra stiffened when she heard that. She knew the cold would be harsh outside, harsher than before. Keanu looked at her instantly. Without speaking, he asked her with his eyes if she was comfortable with the idea. She took a moment to think. Her hands tightened around the coat. She felt the warmth pressing against her, reminding her of safety. She looked back at the director and said she would do it. The director nodded and hurried back outside. Keanu stood up with her, but before she walked out, he gently placed a hand on her shoulder. He asked her one more time if she felt ready. She smiled softly and told him she was. He gave her a small nod, and together they stepped out into the freezing air. The wind hit them immediately. It was stronger than before, pushing against their bodies with invisible force. Sandra pulled the coat tighter around her as they walked toward the set. Keanu stayed close, his presence strong beside her. The snow fell in thick sheets now, swirling in the air like restless spirits. The sky looked dark enough that it could have been early evening, even though it was still afternoon. The cold pressed down from above, heavy and sharp. As they reached the set, Sandra moved to her mark and tried to steady her breathing. Her fingers trembled again, but she held them firmly together to keep them warm. Keanu stood near the edge of the camera line, watching her every move. His eyes stayed locked on her face, ready to step in if she faltered. The director shouted for the crew to prepare. The storm roared behind them, but they all moved with urgent focus. The scene Sandra had to film was simple. She only needed to walk forward, stop at a certain point, and deliver 2 emotional lines. But the wind made every step difficult. The snow blinded her slightly as she moved. She kept her head steady and forced herself through the cold. She reached her mark and waited for the director's signal. The director called action. She lifted her head and began her lines. Her voice came out weaker than before, but still clear. The snow blew into her face and made her blink rapidly. Her breath became unsteady. She pushed forward anyway, but halfway through her second line, something unexpected happened. The wind suddenly shifted and slammed into her side with overwhelming force. She gasped and stumbled backward, losing her balance completely. She would have fallen hard if Keanu had not sprinted forward at that exact moment. He reached her just before she hit the ground. His arms wrapped around her shoulders and pulled her upright again. She fell against him with shock in her eyes. The coat slipped from her shoulders, and the cold hit her chest like a blade. Keanu tightened his hold on her and shielded her with his body as the wind roared around them. The director shouted for everyone to take cover. The crew ran toward the equipment trucks and shelters. The storm had fully arrived. The wind howled like a living force, pushing snow across the ground in violent waves. Keanu leaned close to Sandra and told her they needed to move quickly. She nodded, but her body was trembling again. He wrapped the coat around her once more and placed his arm firmly around her back, guiding her through the storm. As they pushed forward, Sandra felt something deeper than fear. She felt trust, a trust so strong that it carried her through the freezing wind. She stayed close to him, her breath shaking as they moved. The storm grew louder, but Keanu's voice stayed calm as he kept telling her she was safe. His words echoed inside her mind like steady light cutting through the darkness. They reached the tent after struggling through the thick snow. The moment they stepped inside, the crew rushed to secure the entrance. The storm battered against the fabric walls, shaking the entire structure. Sandra collapsed onto a chair, exhausted and shivering. Keanu knelt in front of her immediately, checking her hands, her face, her breathing. She looked at him with wide eyes full of gratitude and emotion. She whispered that he saved her again. Keanu shook his head gently and said he only did what anyone would do. But she knew that was not true. She had felt the moment she began to fall. She had felt how fast he ran. She had felt the warmth of his arms around her. She had felt the fear in his voice turning into relief as he held her steady. The storm outside screamed louder, shaking the tent like a giant hand was gripping it. The crew looked tense and worried. But Sandra's world was focused on one thing, the way Keanu had held her in the snow, the way he refused to let her fall, the way his presence stood between her and the cold like a living shield. The mountain had revealed something new. And Sandra felt her heart awakening in a way she had not expected. The storm grew stronger as the afternoon slowly faded into evening. The tent walls shook again and again, making the metal poles vibrate softly with every heavy gust. The heaters glowed in orange circles, but the air still felt cold enough to sting the skin. The crew huddled in small groups, wrapped in blankets, whispering worried guesses about how long the wind would last. Some tried to lighten the mood with nervous jokes. Others stared quietly at the walls, listening to the storm as if it was telling a story they could not yet understand. Outside, the mountain had turned into a white blur, hidden behind countless layers of falling snow. Sandra sat in the corner of the tent, wrapped tightly in the coat Keanu had given her. She held a warm drink in her hands, but her thoughts were far from calm. She kept replaying the moment she lost her balance. She remembered the way the cold hit her chest when the coat slipped. She remembered the terrifying speed of the fall, and then she remembered the warmth. The moment Keanu reached her, his arms around her, his voice steady against the roaring storm. She had felt a fear she could not hide, but she had also felt something far stronger. Something that wrapped around her heart the same way he wrapped the coat around her shoulders. Keanu sat beside her again, closer than before. His hands were red from the cold, but his expression stayed calm. He kept glancing at her to make sure she was all right. The storm outside did not worry him as much as her trembling breaths did. He had seen her push herself too hard before. He had seen her pretend she was fine even when she was freezing. But the moment she fell earlier had changed something inside him. He felt a quiet urgency to protect her, not just from the cold, but from the weight she placed on herself. After several minutes, he leaned slightly toward her and asked softly if she felt any warmer. She nodded, but her voice shook when she answered. She said the warmth was returning, but the fear still lingered like a shadow in her chest. He listened carefully and placed the edge of the coat more firmly around her shoulders. He told her the fear made sense. He told her the storm was stronger than expected, and no one could have predicted the burst of wind that nearly pushed her down. His voice was gentle, steady, and warm. She felt her breath soften with each word he spoke. The director approached them with a concerned look. He explained that the storm might last for several hours or possibly through the night. The mountain roads were unsafe now. The vehicles could not move through the snow without risk. They would have to stay on location until conditions improved. The crew groaned quietly, but they knew he was right. Sandra looked toward the entrance of the tent where the wind screamed like an angry voice. She felt a flicker of unease inside her, but she also felt Keanu's presence beside her, which softened the fear. The director walked away to help the crew secure more equipment. Keanu turned toward Sandra again and asked if she needed anything. She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the heater. Then she said something unexpected. She said she felt safer with him than she did with anyone else on the set. She said she did not know why, but the world felt calmer when he stood beside her. The words slipped out before she had time to weigh them. She looked down, worried she had revealed too much. Keanu remained quiet for a few seconds. His expression softened, as if her words touched a place inside him that he rarely allowed others to see. Then he spoke in a soft, calm tone. He told her she did not have to understand the feeling right now. He said some connections form without explanation. He said sometimes the cold brings people closer because warmth becomes something they can feel more deeply. Sandra felt her heart shift with his words. A quiet warmth spread through her chest and made her breath tremble. The wind outside began to roar louder. The tent shook so violently that a few crew members stood up to steady the poles. Sandra flinched when a sudden blast hit the side of the tent. Keanu immediately placed his hand on hers, not forcefully but with reassurance. She tightened her fingers around his instinctively. The storm no longer felt like a distant event. It felt personal, like the mountain was pushing its weight against them, testing the boundaries of their strength. After a while, the director called for everyone to gather near the center of the tent where the heaters were hottest. The crew formed a circle, wrapped in blankets and thick jackets. Keanu and Sandra sat near the front of the group. The director explained the plan for the night. They would rotate shifts to check the tent supports. They would keep the heaters on full power, and they would remain seated together to conserve warmth. Sandra listened closely, but her attention kept shifting toward the sounds outside. Each blast of wind seemed stronger than the last. As the evening deepened, the storm reached its peak. The tent trembled violently and snow piled high along the sides. Sandra felt her heartbeat quicken. The cold outside felt like a living force pressing down on them. Keanu noticed the way her shoulders tightened. He shifted closer and draped half the coat over her back as well. She felt the warmth immediately and leaned into it. She whispered that she did not know if the tent would hold. He whispered back that they would face whatever came together. His voice held no fear, only calm strength. Their shoulders touched. Their breathing fell into the same rhythm. The storm screamed around them, but inside the tent a silence formed between them, a silence that spoke louder than words. Sandra felt her heart opening toward him in a way she had not expected when the day began. The cold had pushed her to a point of vulnerability she did not want to reach. But Keanu had caught her every time. He had watched her, supported her, saved her. Now she felt her own emotions shifting like the snow outside. She felt something warm and deep blooming quietly inside her, something she had not felt in years. Several hours passed. Some crew members fell asleep. Others hummed softly to distract themselves from the storm. Sandra remained awake, her head resting lightly against Keanu's shoulder. She felt safe there. She felt grounded. Keanu remained still, allowing her to rest against him without moving away even once. The warmth of his body mixed with the warmth of the coat, creating a small pocket of comfort in the middle of the freezing chaos. Sandra closed her eyes for a moment and let her thoughts wander. She wondered why this day had affected her so deeply. She wondered why Keanu's presence felt so important. She wondered why the mountains seemed to watch them, shifting the weather in ways that pushed them closer together. She wondered what the morning would reveal when the storm ended. Without lifting her head, she whispered a quiet question. She asked Keanu if he was afraid at all. His answer came softly. He said he was not afraid for himself, but he was afraid for her when she fell earlier. He said seeing her slip made his heart jump in a way he did not expect. She opened her eyes slowly and looked at him. The warmth in his expression was unmistakable. She felt her chest tighten gently, not from fear but from emotion. The storm continued through the night. The mountain remained hidden. The wind kept testing the walls. But inside the tent, two people sat closer than they had ever been before, wrapped in shared warmth and quiet understanding. Sandra felt herself drifting into a gentle calm despite the chaos outside. She whispered a soft thank you into the quiet space between them. Keanu heard it and replied with a simple soft "You are safe." The words wrapped around her like the coat around her shoulders. And as the storm slowly prepared to reveal its final truth, Sandra felt her heart open in a way she had never expected this mountain to awaken in her. The storm finally began to soften in the very early hours of the morning. The fierce howling of the wind slowly faded into a low whisper. The tent, which had shaken endlessly through the night, now rested with gentle stillness. The heaters filled the air with a steady warm glow. One by one, the crew members started to wake, stretching their stiff arms and rubbing their tired eyes. A soft, dim light filtered through the frosted fabric of the tent, hinting at dawn outside. Sandra opened her eyes slowly. Her head was still resting gently against Keanu's shoulder. His arm, which he had draped around her earlier, remained there, steady and warm. For a moment she did not move. She simply listened. The storm's voice had disappeared. In its place came a soft, peaceful silence that made the entire world feel new. She breathed out slowly, feeling a calmness inside her chest she had not felt the entire day before. Keanu opened his eyes a moment later, as if sensing she had awakened. He looked down at her with quiet warmth. She lifted her head and tried to sit up properly, but the coat slipped slightly and the cold morning air touched her skin. Keanu gently pulled the coat back around her shoulders without saying a word. Sandra felt her heart soften at the gesture. A small smile formed on her lips and she whispered a quiet good morning. He answered with the same soft warmth. The director stepped toward them with a relieved expression. He told them the storm had passed and the weather was finally safe enough to step outside. The crew began gathering their things, preparing to check the equipment and surroundings. Sandra and Keanu stood up slowly, their bodies sore from the long night but their spirits strangely calm. The tension of the previous day had melted, replaced by a quiet sense of gratitude. When they stepped out of the tent, the world took their breath away. The mountain was covered in a perfect blanket of untouched snow. The storm had smoothed the ground into soft waves of white. The sky above them was clear and pale blue, as if every cloud had been washed away. The sunlight reflected off the snow, creating a gentle glow that made the entire landscape look peaceful and pure. There was no wind now, no sound, only silence and light. Sandra stepped forward slowly, her boots sinking into the fresh snow. Each step felt like stepping into a new beginning. Keanu walked beside her, watching her expression with gentle curiosity. She lifted her hands slightly and let the cold, soft light touch her palms. She felt a strange connection to the mountain in that moment, as if it had stripped her down emotionally the day before only to return her stronger in the morning. The director approached and announced that they could check the footage from yesterday. But before they began filming anything else, he wanted everyone to take a moment and breathe in the calm after the storm. The crew spread out quietly, admiring the beauty around them. Some took photos. Others stood silently absorbing the view. The world felt unmoving, as if nature itself had paused to give them this moment of peace. Keanu turned toward Sandra and asked how she felt. She looked around slowly and answered with honesty. She said she felt changed. She said the storm forced her to face a part of herself she had been ignoring for a long time. She said she felt fear, vulnerability, and strength she did not know she still carried. She looked into his eyes and said she would not have made it through the day without him. Keanu held her gaze gently. He told her she was stronger than she realized. He told her she faced the storm, the cold, and the fall with courage that not everyone had. He told her he only helped because he cared. Her eyes softened at his words. She felt an emotion rising inside her, warm and calm. She stepped a little closer to him. He noticed the movement but did not step back. Their breaths formed small white clouds in the morning air. The sunlight reflected in their eyes. The world around them felt painfully quiet, as if waiting for something. She whispered something that felt heavier than the cold. She told him she had never felt someone protect her the way he did yesterday. She told him the warmth he gave her was more than a coat. It was support. It was care. It was something she had not expected and something she could not forget. Keanu listened quietly. His face remained calm, but his eyes showed emotion. He reached out slowly and adjusted the coat around her shoulders, his fingers brushing her arm softly. The touch was gentle but full of meaning. He told her kindness was not something he gave for reward. He told her he acted because he could not watch her hurt. He told her he felt connected to her in a way he did not expect. His voice stayed low and sincere. Sandra felt a rush of emotion in her chest. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, but deep and warm and real. Before either of them could speak again, the director called out their names, asking them to join the crew near the equipment. Sandra and Keanu exchanged a small smile, one that said they would continue the conversation later. Together, they walked toward the team. When they reached the equipment area, the crew showed Sandra the footage from the previous day. The moment where the world fell silent around her, the soft floating snow, the emotional lines, the way her breath formed small clouds. The director said it looked breathtaking. He said some scenes cannot be created by technique or planning. He said some scenes are given by nature when a person reveals their real heart. Sandra watched the footage with quiet emotion. She saw herself struggling with the cold, fighting to stay strong, and then delivering her lines with raw vulnerability. She felt a strange pride mixed with awe. She had given that moment everything she had. The crew then showed her the moment she stumbled and Keanu ran toward her. The camera caught part of it before the wind forced the lens away. In the footage, she saw her own fear. She saw his determination. She saw the exact moment he reached her and wrapped his arms around her to keep her safe. When she watched it, she felt the warmth again in her chest. She turned toward Keanu slowly. He met her eyes and smiled faintly. After reviewing everything, the director announced that filming for the day would begin soon. But before they returned to work, he encouraged everyone to take a few minutes for themselves. Sandra walked away from the group and stood near a large snow-covered rock. She looked at the mountains, remembering the freezing cold that had shaken her yesterday. Now the same mountains looked peaceful and beautiful. She felt grateful. She felt stronger. She heard footsteps behind her. Keanu walked up quietly and stood beside her without saying anything. They both looked at the mountains together. The silence between them was not awkward. It was warm. It was full of things understood but not yet spoken. Sandra turned her head slightly and whispered that something about the storm changed her. Keanu looked at her and said gently that the storm changed him too. The wind brushed lightly around them, soft and harmless now. The sunlight warmed the snow at their feet. The morning carried a gentle glow that felt like hope. Sandra smiled softly and took a small step closer, her shoulder brushing his. Keanu did not move away. He looked down at her and returned her smile with quiet calmness. She whispered thank you again, not for the coat, not for saving her when she fell, but for being the warmth she needed through the coldest moment of her life. Keanu reached out and gently took her hand. Not tightly, not dramatically, just with honest kindness. The mountain that challenged them the day before now surrounded them with peaceful silence. The storm had ended. The fear had passed, and something warm and real had begun between them. As the crew prepared the cameras for the next scene, Sandra and Keanu stood together on the snowy ridge, wrapped in a new understanding. The cold world around them felt softer. The snow looked brighter. The day felt lighter. And the warmth he gave her on that freezing set became a moment she would carry in her heart long after the mountain snow had melted.